Hello, health seekers. Welcome to another episode of the Keto Pro podcast with myself, Richard Smith. Today, I'm joined with the incredible Ben Azadi. Ben, a good buddy of mine. We've recorded several content pieces together previously. I am super excited to get you back on, man. I think we're going to have an incredible show. Welcome back on board.
Rich, we always have a fantastic conversation, and today I think is going to be our best one yet. So thanks for bringing me back, man.
Definitely. No doubt. Without a doubt. For the guys and the girls who are listening, who are unaware of you and what you do, which I doubt there are going to be many of which, because you are a massive name in the States. But can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my company is called Keto Camp with the K. We specialize in these ancient healing strategies, which include ketosis, fasting strategies, of course, carnivore, different biohacks. We have a strong focus on cellular health. So we look at different things of the human, how the human body operates. For example, we don't look at symptoms as the problem. We look at symptoms as feedback mechanisms from the body, and we explore what has caused the symptom. So that is a different viewpoint, of course, than allopathic medicine and conventional medicine, which is looking to treat symptoms or manage symptoms or mask symptoms. And we empower people to look at symptoms as a gift, a blessing from the innate intelligence, the check engine light, if you will. So we specialize in, of course, ancient healing, and we have our podcast, which is now called the Metabolic Freedom Podcast, previously named the Keto Camp Podcast. But for me and myself, I'm somebody who lived in America my entire life, followed a standard American diet, which we know is really processed. I know it's very similar in the UK and in Canada and different parts of the world. And I was very unhealthy growing up. I dealt with obesity physically. I dealt with obesity mentally. I dealt with sugar addiction. And I got my health in order when I was 24 years old, 16 years ago, where I went through this tremendous amount of weight loss, 80 pounds in about 9 months. And that's what sprung me into the health space. And I've been a student and a teacher ever since. So to recap, I've been in the health space for 16 plus years. I've written 4 books. I'm currently writing my 5th book with Hay House called Metabolic Freedom. And the mission is to educate and to inspire as many people as possible, and to collaborate with people like you, Rich. We're on the same mission. So it's an honor to be here, bro.
Amen. Love it. Absolutely love it. So the title of Keto Camp you've changed.
The podcast changed from Keto Camp Podcast to Metabolic Freedom Podcast, but my company's still Keto Camp. I have the sign behind me still. Yeah.
Yeah. Love it. Do you know, is there any reason in particular you've gone down that route? Because we have, I think, an interesting piece to talk on, but my business, Keto Pro, I very rarely mention the word keto anymore. I tend to use ancestral appropriate diets or evolutionary appropriate. I find the word keto tends to scare an awful lot of people within, outside of our community that don't understand what ketosis is. So is there any reason in particular you've changed it? Is it along that lines of thinking to maybe broaden the spectrum somewhat?
Absolutely. Yeah. Similar lines of thinking. We have recorded for my podcast 771 episodes so far.
Wow.
And when I look at all the episodes we recorded, keto is just one piece to that metabolic puzzle, if you will. It's a big piece. It's an important piece. It's an amazing tool. It's never going away. It's always going to be here because it's a metabolic process, not necessarily a diet. So it's not going away. However, to your point, we're so much more than keto. You're so much more than keto. It's one tool in the shed, not the only tool. So I felt like we were isolating people who might be fearful of keto. They might see Keto Camp or Keto Camp Podcast and think it's only about keto. And that's just a small percentage of the actual metabolic puzzle. So that's why I decided to change the name to the name of my book. So it's cohesive as well, Metabolic Freedom, where we'll still discuss keto. It'll be a part of it. But now we're opening it up to a bigger audience. We're not scaring people off, to your point, and it'll allow us to expand and reach more people.
Yeah, completely agree. So, Ben, recently you've embarked on a journey, a carnivore journey. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that? So I'm carnivore. And what I think a lot of people don't understand is your metabolic state is still ketosis when you are carnivore. And we look at these as being two different things. Keto being a diet, carnivore being a diet. As you say, ketosis is a metabolic state. That carnivore is another subsection of being ketogenic. It's conferred massive benefits for me. And this is the reason that I think that I've maybe resided within this arena. And it's led me down a path of investigating and questioning many things that I once believed. You know, I would quite often make my kale and spinach smoothies with black pepper and turmeric in the morning. I don't touch those compounds at all anymore. And there are reasons for it. And we can get into this as well. But I know that from a keto perspective, you know, there are many that believe there are compounds within there that confers a benefit. But I do believe that that is dependent on situation. And as you rightly say, you know, you mentioned earlier that like medicines are there to treat, you know, something that is just, they're there to treat a symptom, but it's not the root cause. How do we address the root cause? And that, in almost every case, seems to come back to diet and lifestyle. I'm not against medication. If I hadn't taken medication at some point in my life, I would be dead without question. So there's definitely a place for medication. Since then, I've questioned my requirement for certain compounds within the diet that I now know that I don't need, at least on a general basis. But I'm really, really interested about how you've gravitated into, you know, what was it initially that made you decide to embark on a carnivore journey?
Yeah, and you make some really great points there. You know, when we think about keto, ketosis, the metabolic state, there's so many different avenues to get there. What they all have in common is that they're all very low carbohydrate. So whether that's, you know, eating vegetables, but non-starchy vegetables to be very low carb and enter ketosis, that's one avenue. Whether that's doing a 24-hour fast and having zero carbs and zero food, that's another avenue. Or that could be just eating protein and fat, carnivore, essentially zero carbs as well, another avenue. So what they all have in common is that the carbs are very, very low. There's different ways to get there, but they all achieve that metabolic state. And in 2019, I got curious about carnivore. That's when it was starting to make some of the rumblings out there. Some people were calling it the T-Rex diet. Some people were calling it the carnivore diet. We had guys like Sean Baker and Paul Saladino, who were probably the most prominent ones out there. Jordan Peterson as well was talking about what it did for his autoimmune conditions. And some of the anecdotal evidence was super interesting. And it made sense to me that these plants have defense mechanisms that are put in place to help them survive versus their predator, and how so many people have compromised digestive systems, intestinal permeability, leaky gut, essentially, and these compounds make things worse. So like everything that I study and hear about before I start teaching it, I know you're the same way, Rich. I want to do it first to experiment with it, and then I could start living it to lead it, if you will. So my first experiment with it was in 2020, where I did 40 days of straight carnivore. And I got some, you know, data from that and some benefits from that. And then ever since I did that, I've been doing 30 days of carnivore, 40 days of carnivore, 2 or 3 times a year. Now, bringing back to the most recent time that I did it, which is what you're asking, towards the end of last year, towards the end of 2023, I embarked on another carnivore experiment, but this time I wanted to get a whole bunch of different data points so I could put together, like, this is my experiment, day one. I was going to do just 30 days, but I ended up going 90 days to get some more data. So here's what I did. On day one, Rich, I did a comprehensive blood panel from LabCorp, was one of the labs here in the United States. And the retail on that is $3,500, meaning I did a lot of labs. Wow. CBC, yeah, I did a full thyroid panel with the antibodies. I did the lipids with the particle sizes of the LDL, ton of inflammatory markers, hormones, et cetera. So a whole bunch of lab values on day one. I also did a stool test on day one, where I, of course, put my poop into a box and shipped it to this company to analyze my poop. So a gut test. And then I also put on a continuous glucose monitor day one. And then I have an Oura ring, which is looking at my heart rate variability, sleep, etc. So these were all the metrics that I wanted to track. And of course, how I felt. So I embarked on this, you know, carnivore journey, this past experiment. And I only wanted to do 30 days, but I kept pushing it because I wanted to see some significant changes with the values. And I thought 30 days might not be enough. let's do 60. And eventually I went to 90. One of the most interesting things is that when I did that stool test on day one, it took about 3 weeks for me to get those results back. So I was already 3 weeks into carnivore, and I get the results back, and it shows that my diversity, which I think most experts in the health space, especially those that are focusing on gut health, would agree that having a diverse gut microbiome is the name of the game. Diversity is the key. People that live a long, healthy life have more diversity in their gut. So my test showed that my diversity was okay. It wasn't really bad. It was kind of right below average, but not optimal. Of course, I want it to be optimal. And the suggestions that the lab gave me on that report was avoid keto, avoid too much red meat, eat all these polyphenols and fibers and green leafy vegetables and plants, etc. Now, Rich, I did the complete opposite because I did carnivore. I did the opposite of what that test told me to do and what most gut experts would tell you to do. So you would think on day 90, when I retested my gut, it would be a disaster, right? But here's the thing. I retested on day 90 and everything improved with my gut. My diversity improved. I had on day 90, 7 keystone bacterias that were not present on the test on day 1 that were there on day 90, right?
Wow.
So it goes against what you think. Fiber is needed to increase diversity. Fiber is needed for the gut microbiome. I had 0 fiber and my gut improved, right? So the labs also improved. I felt great, more deep sleep, more REM sleep. I have a whole video and podcast coming out with all the results. But yeah, the experiment was a success. Now that's my personal experiment, but it does go against what most people think when it comes to gut health.
Yeah, it's incredible. Fiber is a massive talking point in regards to going carnivore. Where do you get your fiber from? The interesting thing about fiber is that it breaks down to a short chain fatty acid called butyrate, which feeds the colonocytes in the gut. And it does, and that's fantastic. But what many people don't understand is even in a non-ketogenic state, that butyrate further breaks down into beta hydroxybutyrate. So at some point, it still breaks down into BHB. So there's a couple of things with this. Animal proteins do contain fiber, just not in the way that we think they do. They contain other short chain fatty acids in the form of isobutyrate, valerate, and propionate, which are all short chain fatty acids, which arguably feed the colonocyte at a higher rate than butyrate itself does. So we can think of animal proteins as containing animal fiber. But the amazing thing with this is when you are ketogenic, we don't just feed the colonocyte that fiber comes in contact to. We feed every colonocyte because we have beta hydroxybutyrate running through our veins. It's literally feeding every part of the body. But it's amazing, isn't it? That, fiber, the keystone of every nutritional expert on the planet, apart from us, obviously, and I know a few others, would say that plant fiber is essential. And you there have increased your alpha diversity within your gut by removing all plant compounds.
Yeah, exactly. It's not what you think, right? It's exact opposite of what most people would tell you to do. But yeah, that's what I saw. Of course, that's just one experiment that I will show the data on when I release that video, but that's exactly what I saw.
Excellent. Excited to listen to that one. What other things did you find along the journey? So fiber was one. What other metrics did you measure? You mentioned sort of the cholesterol side of things as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, before I get into the lipids, I lost 16 pounds and dropped 6% body fat, and I didn't realize that I my body needed to, but obviously it did. So I got really, really lean. My sleep got so much better when I was looking at my Aura Ring sleep scores before I did my 90 days of carnivore, and then during, there was less awake time during carnivore versus non-carnivore days, meaning I got up less throughout the night. So I had more total sleep, which equaled more REM and deep sleep at the same time. So my sleep improved, my heart rate variability improved, my resting heart rate also improved. It went down to like 42, 43 beats per minute. Outside of carnivore, it's around 45, 46. So my heart was relaxed and I was recovering very, very well. So I saw all that. And then the labs, I did full lipid panel. And I just went up. Do you know who Dr. Philip Ovadia is? Are you familiar with her? Yeah. So he's actually coming here in a couple of weeks to do an interview with me behind me right here. But I actually asked him if he could review my results with me on a Zoom, and then that'll be part of the video. Because this is what I see in my results, and this is my research. But if I bring on a heart surgeon and he says the same thing, like there's much more authority there. So he's the person reviewing that, and I'll just share with you what we found. Right. So my total cholesterol on day one, should look up the numbers right here. Tell you right now, I'm going to give you the specific number because I want to be accurate. So my total cholesterol on day one was, let's see. Okay, total cholesterol on day one was 297. My HDL was 65. These are United States metrics. I'm not sure how it translates in the UK, but 297 milligrams per deciliters, and then 65 milligrams per deciliters for HDL. Triglycerides were 69. My total LDL on day one was 222, right? The marker that everybody says, not everybody, but most cardiologists say it's a problem. So that was day one. Then I went on carnivore. And then day 90, my total cholesterol went from 297 to 434. Okay. My total LDL went from 222 to 350. My HDL went from 65 to 74. My triglycerides surprisingly went from 69 to 78, went up a little bit, still in a good range. But here's the thing. And you know this, Rich, you explained this really, really well. You've done it before. The LDL, we've got the particle sizes done as well, right? So when we look at the particle sizes, even on day one, the majority of the particles from my total LDL were the pattern A, large and fluffy, like 90+% of it. It's just a small percentage coming from that pattern B. So that looked really nice, right? We looked at the particle sizes, that looked really, really nice. My C-reactive protein inflammatory marker on day one was 0.39. On day 90 was 0.52. Both really, really good. And that could be transient based off of soreness from a workout, but both are optimal. Homocysteine went from 10.3, another inflammatory marker, to 9.3 on day 90, right? So in my fasting insulin, this will be the last one, and then we'll stop here. Fasting insulin went from 3.6 to 3.7, right? Super sensitive fasting insulin. So my inflammation low, even though my total cholesterol is super high and total LDL high, the inflammation is low and the particle sizes are what's right, and the HDL was optimal. So what are your thoughts on that, my friend?
Yeah, I'm just looking at those translations now. So I mean that I
I know
think
that's different for you.
the 434 is 11.223 if I've done the conversion correctly, which is higher than mine, and I'm jealous.
Yeah, I beat you.
So my last test was 10.26. So you've beaten me on total, and I think
I'm a lean mass hyper responder.
Hey, but I don't even think that's a problem. You know, we look at these things. You know, it's all of the studies indicate that higher LDL confers a benefit in regards to longevity, and I think we've been spun this web of lies in regards to cholesterol. Every cell in the body's made of cholesterol. It's essential for cell formation, cell communication, nutrient absorption, nutrient transportation. It's essential for healing, and it's essential for the production of hormones. This is why many of us suffer with hormonal problems, especially later in life, because we've had a lifetime of abuse. We've had a lifetime of lack of the essential fats that we require within the body in order to produce these compounds. I've got an interesting question for you coming off the back of this, actually. But yeah, looking at this, your LDL 350 comes at 9, which is higher than my LDL also. So yeah, I'm super jealous.
I love it.
But I mean, that's an incredible profile. So you touched base on the pattern A was over 90% on day one, which is still really good. What was it on day 90?
Yeah, so I'll give you the exact marker. So the small LDL was 491 on day one. That's NMOL per liter, so millimoles per liter. So 491 small LDLP. On day 90, it went down to 403 small LDL. So it actually dropped. Both were optimal because when you look at the majority of my LDL, it's coming from the large and fluffy, but it went from 490 to 403. Pretty good. So when we look at that, and then my total particle count on day 90 was 3,051. But again, that just means I'm burning fat, and the majority of it is coming from the pattern A, large and fluffy, good kind that actually is supported for longevity, immune system, and all that good stuff. But if somebody just got a total LDL done and a total cholesterol and they saw what happened there, most doctors will say, we need to put you on a statin. This carnivore diet's going to kill you, without looking at all the other moving parts we just mentioned.
Yeah, I agree. And in there lies the problem. It's interesting that your cholesterol overall in whichever, parameter we look at has increased, because the general consensus is that, I mean, you've been keto for a long time. And what we see quite often is an elevation in cholesterol, and it's mainly to do with a return back to a natural physiological level. So we're told generally that it isn't keto that leads to elevated cholesterol. It's the lack of the phytosterols, the plant sterols. The phytosterols look so close to human cholesterol that the body confuses it for them. And when we're consuming the vegetable oils, this does lower cholesterol, which is their argument for consuming these oils. But these compounds are toxic. They're toxic so much so to the body. The body tries to excrete them at a massively high capacity, and it reduces the phytosterols to around 2% within the human body. There are people with a genetic condition called cytosterolemia, in which their body loses the ability to remove the phytosterols. And the people who suffer with this condition have a massive increase in heart attack, heart disease. So in there in black, and you can Google that, it's there on any search engine, cytosterolemia, the body's inability to excrete the phytosterols because they are a plant toxin. So when we become keto, we've removed them, then cholesterol increases. But you've been keto for a long time.
Yeah,
So,
but I'm not strict ketosis. I'm like an 85% keto, and then I have what those I call keto flex days. So that's what I was doing before I did carnivore.
okay. So what would your carbohydrate intake be? I mean, on the flex days, I'm guessing you would be, testing the body with X amount of carbohydrate. Would you still be consuming? You certainly wouldn't be consuming any vegetable oils, I should imagine, or seed oils of any kind. It's just
No vegetable oils, no gluten. Those are the two things I don't make any exceptions for. And on a keto flex day, it would be somewhere between 100 and 200 grams of healthy whole food source carbs, maybe for 1 or 2 days out of the week. And then the rest of the week was ketosis for me. This is before I went into carnivore. That was my routine.
Yeah. So even then, no additional vegetable oils. So, we should imagine the general way of thinking is that the cholesterol isn't going to elevate any higher, because you should imagine that transition has already happened for you because you've removed those vegetable oils. I've got a theory. I've spoken to Dr. Paul Mason, Zoe Harcourt, a few people, and I've heard them say a number of times that there's no known mechanism for which, saturated fats increases cholesterol. But I think it can. And I think that, what we've seen with this is the transition into maybe consuming more of these compounds can elevate it. And I'll run this by you and see what you think. When we use fat for fuel, the fat is in the cytosol of the cell. Glucose needs entry through the GLUT4 transporter, but fat is there. It's in the cytosol. MCT breaches that seamlessly. It doesn't need to go through the carnitine shuttle, but fat does. Fat goes through the carnitine shuttle. It converts into fatty acetyl, and then goes through beta oxidation and becomes acetyl-CoA. And then we can't, within the liver, that acetyl-CoA builds up because we need to produce glucose within the body to stay alive. Some of the cells, the erythrocytes and the glutaminergic neurons in the brain, still need rapid energy from glucose. Granted, it's very small, but the body still needs to produce glucose. But we make it naturally, as you know, through a process called gluconeogenesis. But when we do this, the citric acid cycle can't spin because it uses the oxaloacetate in order to convert and create glucose through gluconeogenesis. So the acetyl-CoA builds up, and then it enters HMG-CoA. HMG-CoA is how we create our ketones, beta-hydroxybutyrate, acetone, acetoacetate, and then they'll leave the liver through the monocarboxylate transporters, and they'll hit the target cell and then go through a series of steps through BDH, ACAT, and SCOT. BDH, SCOT, and ACAT in that order, if memory serves correctly, and then we create energy. But
well done, my friend. Well done.
I think, don't quote me, I may be wrong, but I think it's right, and I'm trying to wing this now. But HMG-CoA is a shared pathway with the mevalonate pathway. The mevalonate pathway is how we go on to create ubiquinone, coenzyme Q10, and then desmesterol, and then cholesterol. And there are other sequences involved. But that HMG-CoA, it's a shared pathway. And I believe that it makes sense that if we not overconsume, but if we consume more fat, then X amount is going to filter off into ketone production. Well, what's to say that there isn't overspill down this way into the mevalonate pathway to increase cholesterol? Now, we know, I've seen studies which have shown that a ketogenic lifestyle increases desmesterol. Well, if it's going to do, desmesterol is the precursor to cholesterol. Therefore, why can't that mechanism exist in which consuming more of our natural fats will but that's not a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing.
Yeah, I get it.
But could that be the case with this, that maybe you've gone into a more of and red meat isn't even that high in saturated fats. When we look at it, it's like less than 2% of that fat content in red meat is even saturated fats anyway. But there is an increase. Now, if that pathway is shared, surely there's a possibility there that we can increase cholesterol. And I wonder if that's what we're seeing with this. But all of your markers have improved to what we believe to be healthy. But yeah, I don't know if you've got...
to add I've seen that anecdotally, not just with myself, obviously with my results, but I've taken thousands of people through different keto protocols through my academy. And for those who do testing, in the beginning and then throughout, the majority of them, not just a small percentage, but over 50% of them that do the testing, their total cholesterol goes up, their total LDL goes up, and they see it as a bad thing because their doctor sees it as a bad thing. And they're like, "Oh, Ben, my cholesterol went up, my LDL went up. What should I do?" And I say what you would say. I say, "Good job. You probably feel a lot better, don't you?" And they're like, "Yeah, I do." So I do see that for the majority of people. And I like the thought process that there could be a spillover here. Probably, especially, when there's a steep increase in the total fats, the cholesterol and the saturated fats. Now, that might happen short term, and then it could kind of buffer itself and stabilize. But I do see that happen with the majority of people.
Yeah, it makes sense. And this isn't linear either. It seems to be incremental, because when we begin a ketogenic journey, the body wastes many of the ketones in the form of acetone and acetoacetate. We waste it through the breath and through the urine. And the longer that we adapt, then that conversion, we increase the monocarboxylate transporters and the body's ability to utilize BHB. We create more BHB, we waste less acetone, less acetoacetate. We create more BHB, we utilize more BHB. And this is why when we test on the urine strips and the breath monitors, that we see it coming down and we think that we're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
But that's all part of the adaptation process. And I wonder, because you are an elite ketonian, also whether your ability to highly process and create BHB allows more of a spillover, because your requirement for that compound is less, because it takes less to get the work done. And we see this in insulin. We don't become insulin resistant when we become ketogenic. We become more insulin sensitive. We need less of that compound to perform the work, because we look at insulin as being the enemy. We look at cortisol as being the enemy, but these have actions within the body which are essential for our survival. But it's this overactivation that we don't want. But insulin drops. It doesn't mean that we're insulin resistant. It means that we're getting more bang for the buck. And I believe that that's the case with BHB. And then maybe this is why there's that overspill in regards to increase in cholesterol, which is fantastic.
Yeah,
But
all great things here.
yeah.
It's a
So
reshaping of our physiological systems here that we need. Here in America, 93% of people are metabolically unhealthy. I say they're in a keto deficiency. We need to teach them how to burn fat again because they forgot. And that is exactly all the benefits that come with it. The way you just explained it was really, really brilliant. All these reshaping of these physiological systems are incredible. You're talking about, getting somebody fat adapted, which is the first step. 93% of Americans, and I'm sure it's high in the UK as well, are sugar burners. They forgot how to burn fat. We've detached them from this natural fat burning state and fed them a high sugar diet they're eating every 2 to 3 hours, and they're eating 300 grams of carbs per day, and they're burning sugar. They're in a keto deficiency. So the first step is to flip the switch here, teach them to burn fat, get them fat adapted, which should take 7 to 14 days, sometimes a little bit longer, depending on how that metabolism has been damaged or so. And then you keep at it, and then eventually you get keto adapted, which is what you just explained, where now your cells are so efficient, your mitochondria are so efficient at using those ketone bodies that if you tested your breath or your urine or your blood, it's going to be low or less than what it was when you first started. And most people think that's a bad thing. Let me take exogenous ketones. And I'm not against exogenous ketones, but the thing is, it's not a bad thing. This is a really great thing. The goal is not to chase ketones, just like you don't want to have higher glucose. The goal is to have an efficient metabolism that's using those ketones. And that is what keto adaptation does for you. And that is the goal. The hard part, Rich, is that there's not a test to say you're keto adapted, right? There's not something that says like you could prick your finger and then it tells you you're keto adapted. So for me, and I want to ask you the question, but for me, when I'm taking students through the process, usually about 8 to 12 weeks in of consistent, ketosis, I'll start asking them questions now, like, how do you feel now? Like this week going into it, week 8 or whatever it is. And when they start to tell me like, oh my gosh, there's like another level of benefits that are now I'm
yeah.
experiencing, like my brain, my performance, my sleep. To me, that's signaling that they're achieving this keto adaptation. So I use their feedback as a way for me to test because there's no test to do it. But I'm curious if you do the same thing and what are your mechanisms for knowing as well?
Yeah. Do you know, you've almost taken the words word for word right out my mouth,
I
because
love it.
along my journey, as you say, you can begin to burn fat incredibly quickly, but to become keto adapted takes a long time. And it's the golden question, isn't it? How long does it take? To which my answer is, look, it's very much individual. But for me, 3 months in, I went to another level, and I just felt more energetic. Everything was a little bit more clearer. My thought process was a lot better. Um, my inflammation was lower. I just felt a general sense of feeling better. After 6 months, that increased further. And 12 months, it increased again to a point where I didn't even think that I could exist in. Everything just became more colorful. I felt lighter on my feet, just a general sense of well-being. The interesting thing with this is when I left school, I did an IQ test, a proper IQ test, and I scored incredibly low on this test, to the point where like it was well below average. And I'm talking like the average in the UK at the time, I think was 100, and mine was like 80 something. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is pretty dire. I've done 3 since I've been keto, and they've ranged from 128 up to 149 or
Wow.
150. It might be 159. I can't remember. Whatever Einstein's IQ was, I was one below on the top test anyway.
Damn.
And that's my claim to fame. And I attribute this to living this lifestyle, because now my brain, it just feels full of energy. It feels like it's thriving. And to me, that is being keto adapted. You know it and you feel it. And I wish there was a test to confirm, but yeah, there isn't. I agree with everything you've just said in regards to these incremental changes. But it's an incredible journey. It's an incredible journey.
It is. That's awesome, bro. Point less than Einstein. Yeah,
It's
definitely put that like on your Instagram bio or something.
Yeah, definite claim to fame. What else? What other changes did you notice? Did you test any other metrics? Were there any things that stood out that shocked you maybe?
The biggest shock was the gut test, the fact that, diversity increased, keystone bacteria increased, going against conventional wisdom there. I didn't expect that. I thought it would get better, but not to that extent. Um, I felt great just overall. Some other tests, different experiments outside of carnivore. I ended up at the same time of carnivore getting a cold plunge. So I have this cold plunge in my backyard. So I did some different experiments with the cold plunging, and I have Raynaud's. Are you familiar with Raynaud's, Rich?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it's an autoimmune condition, and my Raynaud's. The reason I developed it is because of my poor lifestyle for the first 24 years, very toxic lifestyle, silver fillings in my mouth, moldy home, like all these factors triggered this gene. And my Raynaud's used to be really bad, and to the point where 7 years ago, what was it, 2017, I was hiking in Washington State, this mountain called Snow Lake Mountain with a couple of friends of mine. We hiked this mountain, it takes like an hour and a half to get to the water, and it's just beautiful, one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen in my life. And there's this lake there called Snow Lake Mountain, and there's ice just like melting into it. Even though it was the summer, it was super really cold water, and I jump in for like a minute, come out, and I knew I had Raynaud's and I would get flare-ups, but I didn't expect that. Like at this point, my entire hands were completely white all the way to my wrist, like the most severe Raynaud's flare-up I had ever had. My hands were pretty much crippled like this. I couldn't even open them, and I thought I was going to lose my hands. Honestly, I was freaking out, and I'm looking for other people, other hikers, and I'm asking, and I find some people and I ask them if they have a lighter so I could hold it underneath my hand, and I eventually find somebody with a lighter, and I do that, and I take care of that, right? And I was able to be okay, but that's how severe it was. Right now, fast forward to now, I've done so many things for my health. Of course, keto, carnivore, heavy metals detox, getting out of the moldy home, some of the main things that caused the Raynaud's. And I got this plunge. And I said, all right, I'm going to use this plunge to intentionally expose myself to cold temperatures and adapt to it through that principle of hormesis to become better at cold exposure. Because people tell you if you have Raynaud's, you do not want to plunge, you do not want to touch cold stuff. It'll cause a symptom. Right. So I got this plunge, and I know this is outside the carnivore experiment, but it happened at the same time. And I think it's really interesting.
To me, it's all part of the same piece.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. All right. So the way I view this, and I think, Rich, a lot of people in our space, in the biohacking space, they say they know what hormesis is, but they don't understand it. The majority of people do not understand hormesis. And what hormesis is essentially is you apply a stress, your body adapts to that stressor, and you're healthier and stronger, right? Fasting is a stress. Cold plunge is a stress. Sauna is a stress. Exercise is a stress. Red light therapy is a stress. I mean, I could go on and on with different biohacks. And if you don't understand the principle of hormesis, you do too much, you don't adapt to the stress. And now instead of benefiting and staying in this hormetic zone, it drops and you actually hurt yourself and create inflammation, etc. So cold plunge is no exception here. So I knew this principle going into it. So the way I started was 70 degrees. I know that's not cold, 70 degrees Fahrenheit. That's not cold, but that's where I started with my plunge. I set the thermostat thing to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And I did a minute, and I got a flare up with my Raynaud's. And I thought, oh, okay. Then I did it again 2 days later, 70 degrees, a minute, no flare up. I'm like, okay, my body adapted. That was quick. Then I went down to 65 degrees Fahrenheit, did a minute, flare up. Okay. Did it again a few days later. Same thing, a minute, no flare up. And you could see I kept doing this same system where if I don't get a flare up and I pay attention to my sleep and HRV and if I see things improve, then I progress to the next level. Right. So now I'm at 48 degrees. I actually did it this morning, Fahrenheit. I did 2.5 minutes, no flare up. Right. So this is me adapting to the stress of cold plunge, etc. My goal is to get to that 39 degrees, which is the lowest it gets, do 3 minutes with no flare up. But this is the way I'm doing it. And I hope that's beneficial because you hear people say that cold plunging is bad for you, or sauna is bad for you, or fasting is bad for you. They're right and they're absolutely wrong at the same time, because it's not that it's bad for you. It's only bad for you if you're not adapting to it. So you want to make sure you feel better the rest of the day. Your heart rate variability increases, your sleep improves. If you see the opposite, you did too much. You did too much cold plunge or too much sauna or too much exercise, and you want to make sure you scale it back before you build it back up. So I was doing this experiment throughout the carnivore. I'm still doing it because I'm kind of working myself there, but it's been cool to see my body progress towards that outcome.
Yeah, love that. That's hormesis is it's one of those talking points that I cover quite often, because what you've just described there is environmental hormesis. And I'm a massive advocate of doing environmental hormesis. And again, as you say, the theory is a little bit of stress. It involves this adaptation, and we heal and repair and grow, and there's a beneficial outcome. Ketosis, we may view that as being non-environmental. And by that, I mean, there's two different types of hormesis, molecular and environmental. Molecular would come from the compounds that we eat, and environmental, cold water therapy. Keto, to me, is environmental. Even though we class it as a diet, coming back to what you said, it's a metabolic state. And if you were to be in an environment in which food was scarce, then you would produce ketones. So therefore, ketosis is environmental. So the keto lifestyle, being in ketosis, to me, is an environmental effect, or it falls into that environmental hormesis.
I agree.
Brilliant. Good. I'm glad you agree. That's something I threw out there recently. And the reason I say that is that when I look into molecular hormesis from certain plant compounds, and this is the reason that I've removed lots of plants, the antioxidant benefit that we see is, in fact, a pro-oxidant. It begins its journey as a pro-oxidant, and it activates the NRF2 pathway, which is an oxidative stress pathway. And we see this elevation in glutathione, and then scientists believe, well, this is a hormetic response. But what we quite often see is the elevation of glutathione. Glutathione is elevated to conjugate that toxin, to excrete it from the body, except the glutathione drops back down to baseline incredibly quickly and quite often ends up below baseline. Whereas environmental hormesis, it's elevated and it stays elevated for prolonged periods of times and quite often doesn't fall even back down to baseline. That is true hormesis. It's different from molecular, it's environmental. And that's why I've moved away from many of the compounds that I believe we're told are antioxidants, because they first activate the NRF2 pathway. They first begin their journey as pro-oxidants. Other compounds that can elicit that response, elicit a hormetic response through the NRF2 pathway, are things like lead, mercury, arsenic, tobacco, smoke. And if we are to believe that certain compounds in the plant kingdom are going to confer a benefit, then we must also believe that lead, mercury, and arsenic also confer a benefit, because they elicit the same hormetic response.
Yeah, it's interesting. The studies show there's a really short-term benefit of those environmental toxins, and then there's a sharp crash, and that's the danger zone right away.
Yeah, and it's a good friend of mine, Andrew Scarborough. I don't know if you're familiar with Andrew, but he was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer 11 years ago, given a few months to live.
Wow.
And he's still alive and kicking. He lives a ketogenic lifestyle.
Amazing.
There's a trend here, isn't
Andrew.
it?
Yeah, it's awesome.
He would be an incredible guest, I think, for your podcast. A great guy. But one of the things that he mentioned to me recently is that, well, keto activates the NRF2 pathway. So in one context, I'm saying, look, these compounds cause this, but keto does it. It does, but only because we're not in that metabolic state. We're coming from, as you said earlier, we're in a highly glucose, glycolytic state. We are consuming glucose. We're sugar burners. So now we need to readapt into becoming fat burners. So this is a shock to the system. And it activates the NRF2 pathway, but it only does so for 2 to 3 weeks. And then it no longer activates. It's because it's a shock to the system, because we're coming away from being sugar burners. But we're born in a ketogenic state. We should have never have gone into burning sugar for fuel. And it's funny how we use that term, we've become fat adapted. It's almost because we've had to train our bodies to become sugar adapted. We've lost our body's ability to realize its natural metabolic state. And this is why I believe it activates the NRF2 pathway for a short term. But beyond this, it no longer activates. At least it doesn't overactivate, which the other compounds do. And I found that incredibly interesting because it's, yeah, and I'm glad you agree that keto is environmental. It's not a diet. It's not something that we eat. It's environmental. But I love
think
that
that's
story.
I think that is a very important to distinguish that, and we're on the same page here. And when you look at keto as a metabolic state, metabolic process that we're all designed to use, every single one of us, our ancestors all use ketosis, then it detaches the dogma, and that's what separates keto from a vegan diet or a paleo diet or an XYZ diet, because it is not a diet. It's a metabolic state.
Yeah.
Diets come and go. Metabolic states are here as long as we exist, and it's not going away. As long as humans have exist, ketosis will remain. Now, it won't be as popular. There'll be, fluctuations, but ketosis is not going away is the point. It is a metabolic state. We are not designed to be stuck burning sugar. Like you said, we have trained ourselves to be sugar burners. Now we need to train ourselves to go back to our natural fat burning state.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. So, I mean, you use as you've said earlier, you use a flex version of keto, which is one of the things that you teach. Can you explain some of the benefits of using that protocol? I mean, would you recommend that, or do you think it is safe to live in a ketogenic state continuously? Do you think we should be changing and testing systems? What are your thoughts? There's lots of people within sort of our space who have recently come out and said that long-term low-carb diets or lifestyles can be detrimental. One of which, Dr. Chafee and I, we looked at research that Georgie Dinkoff and Dr. McCullough published. And
yeah.
we quite quickly ripped it apart. We did a 2-hour podcast on it, and we went through each bit by bit. I mean, I've been ketogenic for over 10 years, and in the early stages, I did fluctuate in and out. I've tested carb loading. I've tested targeted keto. I've experimented with carb all the way along my journey. I work with other people it works well for. It never works well for me. And I wish it did, because I would love to be able to put, carb back in. And I always try to use cleaner carb as well. Like white rice for me is a clean version because it's lectin free.
Yeah.
I tried to stick to the cleaner versions, but for whatever reason, my body just doesn't want to be burning sugar. And I seem to be thriving on just eating meat, eggs, fish, and cheese. But can you talk to us a little bit about, how we could maybe implement the flex protocol and what benefits that could confer? And do you have to do it, or, what are the benefits of doing so?
This is probably where me and you have more disagreement than agreement, and that's fine. It's important to have these conversations. I do agree with you that everybody is different, and not everybody is designed to flex. Like, to your point, you feel so good and you're thriving, staying in a ketogenic state, and I think you should stay there. Like, I think as long as you are thriving and you feel good and things are working for you, like, definitely keep doing it. In my book, Keto Flex, I'm about to release the second edition. It's about to be completed in the next month. And when I talk about the chapter on keto flexing, which essentially means these are intentional higher carb days, but they're not high carb days, meaning they're still low carb when you compare it to the standard American diet, but it's not low carb enough to be in ketosis. So I want to make that, I want to distinguish there. And if you do a higher carb day, it's a lower fat day, because we don't want to interfere with that Randall cycle and have high carbs and high fat. We know that's a disaster. That's where Dinkoff and Mercola go. They have some things right there, but I think they're just so missing the point there. And I love that you tore them apart, because they think keto shreds your brain. It's a stressful state. They're not, first of all, they never distinguish between short-term ketosis and different stages of ketosis and long-term, but even with their long-term views, there's a lot of loopholes there. And I got to listen to that interview you did, or podcast you did with Anthony. So in that chapter, Keto Flex, that I have coming out, I say there, before you even decide to consider doing a Keto Flex approach, look at how you feel, get some labs done. And if you are thriving right now, you feel really good, labs look good, then don't even flex right now. But if you come to a point where your results start going away, then you could revisit this chapter and you could start flexing. Now, how you flex is very different. Somebody who's a type 2 diabetic is not going to flex with a higher carbohydrate day. They're going to flex with a higher protein day and a higher caloric load. That's another way of flexing without increasing your carbs.
Love it. Yeah.
Somebody who's carnivore who wants to flex, which I typically do this because I'm mostly meat-based now, even though I'm not strict carnivore. If I flexed on a carnivore, I will have some fruits and some honey, right? Kind of like Paul Saladino thing. Not every day, but as a carnivore flex. Women will flex differently than men, and then women who have a menstrual cycle flex differently than women who have a postmenopausal, excuse me. So there's different ways to do it. If you decide to do it, you would do a custom protocol that you would find that works for you. Like for me, what works well is I'm typically in ketosis and doing some fasting strategies Monday through Friday. And then on Saturday and Sunday, I flex out. But here's the thing. I'm so metabolically healthy and metabolically flexible. I could have 200 grams of carbs on a Sunday. And then by Monday night, I'm back into ketosis because I've done the work to get there. Now, if you have not done the work and your metabolism is still burning sugar and you're not keto adapted, there's no business to start flexing, right? So there's different variations to do it. I see the benefits for a lot of people, but there are exceptions. Like you're an exception, Rich. Anthony's an exception. There's more exceptions out there that thrive in a continuous ketosis state, but not everybody, right? So that's where the flexing comes in for those who want to actually go in and out of ketosis.
Yeah, and you said before you kicked that off that we slightly disagree. I completely disagree. I completely agree. Sorry, I completely agree with exactly what you're saying. There are friends of mine who thrive on cycling. It just doesn't work for me, but they are thriving, and these are people who are in incredible shape and they are dominating, life. So I think it is very individual, and I think it is something that people should try because it does allow more flexibility. If you can implement that sort of protocol, it does allow maybe more sustainability also, because one of the things of living, a ketogenic or carnivore-based lifestyle that I quite often get asked is, well, what do you eat every day? It's quite restrictive. I don't find it restrictive because I love the foods I eat, but I can see how many other people would think so. But I mean, if you can flex, then why wouldn't you? If your body's going to thrive on it, and it sort of does make sense. Through an evolutionary perspective, we probably would have eaten fruit around the end of summer in order, it's seasonal fruits. Yeah. So it does make sense in order to flex. Yeah, it's interesting, and I think that I think that everybody should try that, because if that's the difference between maintaining the journey and throwing in the towel, then that could be the key. So yeah, I'm a massive supporter of that. It just doesn't work for me, but I'm probably just a bit of a freak. But
yeah, no, do what works for you. That's the overall theme that we're talking about here, right? And I do want to also emphasize one more time: if you're going to increase your carbs, you're not going to have a high fat day. It's a low fat day, maybe less than 30 grams of fat on that day. You do not want to eat high fat and high carbs. Now, high carbs and high protein, fine, but not high carbs and high fat. So just keep that in mind for you if anybody tries a keto flex day.
Spot on. Completely agree. Completely agree. Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, what have you learned from the journey of the 90-day carnivore? Is it something that you think? I mean, you've alluded to being more sort of predominantly animal based now. Are you still eating vegetables, Ben, or have you reduced them? What's your general outlook on? I mean, because you're still ketogenic, and as you say, these carbohydrates you put in, I would argue that they're probably not even enough to pull you out of a ketogenic state from a measurement of BHB. But again, this isn't something we can test,
Yeah.
So I would argue that isn't even enough maybe to pull you out completely. And I believe that there's still probably some base level of ketones thriving within your body. But
I'm taking some ketones right now, by the way.
I always do before a podcast.
Cheers, bro. Took a nice shot here. Yeah. So look, I love carnivore. Now, here are the drawbacks. Social events. My fiance is not carnivore. She loves to eat. She's a foodie. She lives to eat, and I eat to live. But I still enjoy food and I enjoy time with her. And I'm metabolically healthy where I could have some times where I could splurge a little bit. Now, I mentioned I don't make an exception with gluten or seed oils. Never have that unless it's unknowingly. I avoid that at all costs. But I'll have sugar because I'm healthy. I'll have carbs because I'm healthy. Now, plants, I have done so much experimentation that I have found the plant toxins that really cause symptoms and inflammation and problems in my body. And I have found safer plants that don't cause too much harm, at least how I feel when I eat them. So I eat low plant toxin foods that I agree with. Arugula, I do fine with arugula. I do fine with small amounts of broccoli and Brussels sprouts. I know Anthony Shafee. But if I have small amounts of that and I'm heavy on arugula, I'm fine. Now, if I have kale or spinach or nightshades or tomatoes, eggplants, goji berries, I get inflamed. I get brain fog. I feel that right away. I don't have any of that. So I have white rice, like you mentioned. No nightshades, no lectins, no anti-nutrients. I don't have brown rice because I don't do good with that, right? So I find the right carbs or plants that I feel good with, and I stay away from the rest. Something that I did learn, Rich, is that I have an issue with oxalates, especially when it comes from almonds. And we know people in the keto space are just almond flour, almond keto cookies, almond milk, man. And I would get these styes in my eye that are so painful, so ugly, and all this pus comes out. And it kept happening like every 6 months, every 6 months. And I'm thinking, where is this coming from? Am I touching my dog and touching my face? Is it something in my environment that's dirty? And I've come to find that it was the freaking oxalates from the almonds and the keto pizzas that I was eating that was forcing its way out of my eyes through a sty. And once I removed the oxalates and really dramatically decreased it, I haven't gotten a single sty in a couple of years. And dude, I remember there are Capello's. It's a popular keto pizza here in the United States that you could buy at the supermarket, and it has almond flour crust. And back when I thought that was safe, I would eat about 2 of them. And the sty, I would literally feel something growing in my eye like an hour after I've ate it. And then the next morning, the sty is developed and is there for like 2 weeks, just like dumping the oxalates, right? So these are things that I've learned. I don't think I think most people, I should say, should avoid almonds and almond flour. There's so many better options out there. Almonds are not healthy for you. So yeah, that's a long answer to your question. But these are some things that I learned that worked for me.
Love it. And that is exactly it. We need to utilize the compounds that are less toxic. Anthony doesn't drink an awful lot of coffee.
Yeah.
Coffee works really well for me. It
Me
doesn't
too.
cause inflammation. I'm conscious of the acrylamide content. Acrylamide is accumulative. I make sure that I don't overconsume. I don't overconsume the caffeine, so it affects the glutamate to GABA ratio. So I use it as a tool, but it doesn't cause inflammation for me. So, I mean, that is a I do cycle it out. I do months and weeks without it, but
Smart.
I don't notice any benefit to taking it out, but I do notice a benefit to keeping it in when I use it for a targeted approach. Yeah, so I mean, there are compounds out there that can be beneficial, as you say, with almonds. Almonds are also high in cyanogenic glycosides.
Yeah.
Other compounds, apple seeds, amygdalin, flax seeds or linseeds, they're high in linamarin, that's a hydrocyanic glycoside, which breaks down into hydrocyanic acid, which is cyanide. To put that into perspective, 200 milligrams of flax seeds is enough to kill potentially an adult human being. 200 grams. That is an awful lot amount of flax seed.
Wild.
But coming back to what you said earlier, I mean, it's, if I was to offer somebody a cup of rat poison, and it took this much rat poison to kill somebody, and I offered it to somebody and said, look, there's only this much rat poison in there. You're not going to die. And guess what? I filled the rest up with loads of vitamins and minerals and some sugar for you, so it tastes really nice. Do you want some? That person's going to tell me no. But that's exactly what we're doing when we overconsume things like almonds and these flax seeds and other compounds. There's lots of compounds that contain these cyanogenic glycosides. And it's scary to think of what volume. Eating 6 to 8 apples, the seeds from 6 to 8 apples is potentially on the lower end enough to kill an adult human being. No, and that is incredibly scary. And I recently Googled because I used to do this. I used to make my fruit smoothies. I used to pop some apples in. I would add some flaxseed and some almonds, and so on and so forth. I'd make up this big fruit smoothie. But I'd put the full apples into the blender. I wouldn't think about removing the seeds. And I would add maybe 2 to 3 apples. And when you look at this, up to 6 apples is enough to kill someone. And I put the flaxseed,
Jeez.
and add in other compounds, maybe like spinach and whatever. And when you look at an average smoothie that's sold on the high street, as little as 3 of these could potentially be enough to kill an adult human being. And yet, we make these things and we give them to children. And it's like, what, and there's documented cases of this. This isn't just some fairy tale that we're just making up. These compounds are toxic. And as you say, almonds are particularly toxic, especially with oxalates in regards to. So it is a case of gravitating around these things, isn't it? And working out which foods, tomatoes or tomatoes, wherever you're from, UK or the States, they incredibly high in lectins. They cause massive issues for me. And again, broccoli, if I were to consume broccoli, that doesn't seem to cause me an awful lot of problems. But again, I don't eat an awful lot of it. So I think it is very much an individual approach, as you say, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. And the cool thing about, and I have to go in about 3 minutes because I have another meeting, but the cool thing about carnivore, for those who end up doing it, it's essentially an elimination diet, right? You know this, Rich. So if you decide to navigate away from carnivore, like the best way to do it, this is what I teach my students, is you start to bring in maybe 1 to 3 non-carnivore foods at a time and see how your body responds to those foods. So maybe it's broccoli, avocado, and we'll throw spinach there. And you throw those into the mix and then you get symptoms from it. And you're like, okay, so one of these 3 foods is not good. And then you can kind of isolate it and kind of go from there. But symptoms will occur either right after or even a day or 2 later. So it's kind of tricky there. So maybe you stick with those same foods and kind of experiment. But once you start doing, and it takes time, I get it. But once you start kind of fine tuning things and bringing things slowly in, seeing how your body responds. Okay, I didn't respond well to this. Almonds, remove it. I didn't respond well to flax seeds, remove it. But I responded well to arugula, or even you responded well to the avocado, right? So now you start to fine tune things and you could find the diet that works for you, where you don't necessarily have to be carnivore, but it could be a low plan toxin sort of approach that's working for you and you feel great. That's where I'm at right now. That's the benefit of carnivore. One of the benefits of carnivore.
Love it. That is fantastic. Ben, I don't want to keep you too long. What tip, if there's one tip that you can give the viewers and the listeners, what would that be?
Well, the body is built to heal itself. I don't care if you're listening and watching and you're 21 or 91. I don't care if you're on 17 medications or none, 17 different symptoms or none, whether you're active or not, doing keto or not. I mean, whatever, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your circumstances are. If you have the combination to a code, you unlock the code. You unlock it if you have the combination. So we are talking about combination to the health code, and it doesn't matter where you live, what the color of your skin is, your political party, your symptoms. If you have the combination to the health code, you will unlock that code. So the health code is following these ancestral principles, removing the interference by eating clean keto, low carbohydrate approach, fasting, hormetic stressors that you adapt to, sleep, movement, mindset. Start chipping away and adding in one thing at a time, mastering that habit, tweaking that, and then building from there. The body is so resilient. It will adapt. You will thrive. So whatever resonated with you from today's conversation, choose 1 or 2 things, take action with it, master that, and then start habit stacking the next thing, and you'll be surprised how fast you get results.
Ben, I love that, my man. Absolute gentleman. Really quickly, where can people find you?
benazadi.com is my website. And then I have my podcast, which is now called Metabolic Freedom Podcast. Rich was on the podcast before. You could find that in our catalog as well.
Fantastic. Ben, absolute pleasure as always, my man. Thank you so much for coming on. Can't wait to get this out and look forward to touching base again with you soon.
Thank you for your work, bro. I'm a big fan. I appreciate you. Thanks for the opportunity, Rich.
Way too kind. Thank you.